Hi everyone, welcome back to Dad's Planning Politics.
Hey guys, hey friends, hey listeners. We've got a lot to get into today. Do you want to run through the timeline?
Yes, it's all about ceasefires today, Iran and Israel and the Congo and Rwanda. And we'll also talk about the recent NATO summit where Trump attended and many things were decided.
Many things were decided. Yeah, so we'll get into Iran, of course, first of all, because obviously a lot has been happening with that recently. I think we were thinking about even doing a separate podcast just to go into Iran and, the possibility of regime change and, the US interference, but we thought we'd just condense it. We want to give you a good rundown on everything that's been happening. So, of course, the attack started a few weeks ago, and we talked about them in previous podcasts. And then it has now come out that the US-led missile attacks on the nuclear bunkers were not necessarily entirely successful. And that, Iran could still have a lot of capability in that area, and this may have just delayed them for 3 or more months.
Or 2 years, depending
Or
on.
2 years, depending on who you listen to. But there's so many different voices in this discussion. The International Agency of um, Energy,
Atomic Energy,
Atomic Energy Agency, International um,
Atomic Energy
Yes,
Agency.
yeah, exactly. Has said that they were very far away from creating a nuclear missile. So we really don't know who to trust at this point.
But well, there was also a press conference yesterday in the US. This was the US, just as a bit of background, is the only country in the world with these bunker busting bombs. Supposedly this cost like, I don't know, $2 billion or something the size of taking these B-2 bombers and etc. So the US, Pete Hegseth got upset with the press yesterday, and they were talking about what the impact was, and they were showing demonstrations of what had happened, etc. So who knows? Obviously, it's severely damaged their ability to produce nuclear power
I
or
mean, I don't
produce
know
a
if
nuclear
that's
weapon. The question is, how long will it delay them? 2 months, 2 years? Nobody really knows that.
I mean, I think it's interesting though. I don't know about you, but their only evidence for how much the bunkers had been destroyed was them showing a test of these bunker bombers.
Yeah.
And of course, in a controlled testing environment, you can show that they have like a great capacity for destruction, right? Of course. That comes with
But
it.
it's awfully scary technology, but it's pretty good technology, and the US is the only one in the world
I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just
right?
talking about the fact that they're only like proof that they did any damage was that they showed proof of a test
Sure.
of the
I
missile.
think that's often the case, and who knows whether Iran
I don't know if it is
took
often the case.
took a lot of this material out of there beforehand. Nobody really knows this. The fact is, Israel attacked Iran and was pretty effective in controlling all the airspace. It seems like the Iranian defense forces are really much reduced versus what they were in the past. And I think, Trump and the US saw this as opportunity to leverage the back of Israel's success to achieve a decisive change in momentum for Iran versus the others. And it's fascinating that the ceasefire is holding.
Well, let's go into the details of the ceasefire, right? So we need to go into that. So you guys, in case you haven't been looking at the news recently, I'm sure you have, obviously, because it every night at 7 p.m. whatever, I think we sit down and hear the Iran America bullseye flashing on the ABC. So it would be impressive if you'd managed to avoid it. But the ceasefire was announced by Trump on Tuesday, seemingly just decided by him and then put onto the internet, and with hopes that both parties would agree to the ceasefire. There were some initial problems with it. Both parties, Israel and Iran, continued to fire a few missiles back and forth at each other, but ultimately have stopped. their attacks now and have argued that it was before the implementation of the ceasefire actually began. So, lots is happening there. It will be interesting to see the fallout of this, because obviously these attacks have harmed people and places in Iran and is in Israel, and see how the populations will respond to such an attack, if they will strengthen against the regime, or if they will be in support of the regime and have a stronger Iranian national pride in response to the US. So, they'll shore up against American and Western intervention.
From what I read of Iran, Iran is very liberal and the countryside is very conservative. So if any push on the government's going to happen, it'll happen in Tehran, right? And people from what I read, are very unhappy with the leadership in Iran. And you've got to give it some credit to Trump around this ceasefire, right? Because he was pissed off with both Israel and Iran, and he swore about them, because they're so used to fighting, which I think he reflects the mood of the world. And so I actually think there's a sigh of relief that this has been done, right? And there's a hope that whether there's regime change or not, it sets Iran back. I mean, many people would like to see regime change in Iran, but as you know, the challenge of that in the Middle East is you get rid of a firm leader, and sometimes it's even more chaotic than that. The move to democracy is not always simple and easy.
I mean, it's not just in the Middle East. You're talking about every country
No,
in
but
the world that's ever had an incredibly autocratic, powerful leader in charge, where there are no stable democratic processes. How in the hell are they supposed to then enact like a stable, non-corrupt government? It's an incredibly difficult thing to do.
But the examples recently, a lot have been in the Middle East, the Arab Spring and all of that.
Yep.
That's why I'm just saying, because that's been the most recent example, right?
Look, I'm going to say I'm not in the mood to agree with Trump really on anything. I think any idiot with a limited information of foreign policy would know that these two countries have been fighting for an incredibly long time, and that it goes far deeper than just the recent attacks.
Yeah, but to get them to achieve a ceasefire is an achievement.
Yes, of course it's an achievement.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a war up until a few weeks ago.
I know, but give him credit for that.
That is could say that the war was only started because of Trump in the beginning. So well done, he's cleaning up his own shit. And yeah, this is all only relevant if regime change is accelerated or supported. Because what was the goal of this otherwise? What is
to set back the Iranian?
But we don't know that it has been set back.
Well, it's been set back by some amount. Who knows what the amount is by some amount, whether it's months or years, who knows? But we could talk forever about that. But certainly it's been set back.
I just think it's all well and good to see that Trump has done a very basic thing, when actually, if you look at what the experts say on regime change itself, right, you need a weakened government, you need weakened leaders in charge, and you need a strong populace. Look, regardless of what he's done, the regime has become weaker in recent years. It's some say its weakest point ever. That's not because of Trump. It is just at its weakest point ever. Because also he hasn't been in power for that long.
It's because of Israel. I mean, the destroying of Hezbollah and the master stroke of these things. I mean, they were one of the key angles of the Iranian regime, the Hezbollah, and they're devastated.
I'm not saying.
Right? So certainly it's because of Israel, the weakening of Iran. Well, you were saying about Trump, but
well, look, you wanted me to argue with you more, so I'm doing what you asked for. Yeah, obviously Israel has had an incredible impact on that, and Israel in the past, we've seen a shift in their policy, because in Iran, right, over the past 4 decades since this regime has been in power, the West has always been incredibly focused on restricting their nuclear focus, rather than actually improving the human rights of Muslim people and the people within Iran. But now we've seen somewhat of a shift with Israel in recent weeks and in the past few years, focusing on supporting the populations within Iran and potentially supporting rebels and opposition to the regime itself. So we'll see how this grassroots led opposition to the regime will continue now that Israel has, obviously weakened their the Revolutionary Guard, which is their main enforcer of the regime. The Revolutionary Guard, it's what has been there every time civilian protests have happened. The Revolutionary Guard has come along, arrested hundreds and hundreds of people, tortured them, etc., and so dampened the protests, obviously, because people are scared of being arrested and tortured. Even now, 700 people have been arrested in the past couple of weeks. Already 10 people have been executed, saying that they have been colluding with Israel, and that's why they've been executed as a result. So look, there's a lot happening with the regime there. It has already become weaker. They've started to turn their attention back to the population and to punish the people they think are weakening them. Obviously, they don't want regime change, and if the rest of the world is calling for it, they're going to do everything in their power to stop it from happening.
Like I said, I think the world's breathing a sigh of relief that Iran's been set back. This has been going on for 40 years. People they're very impatient and they're very short term in this day and age. I mean, nobody's talking about Ukraine at the moment and the incursions Russia's making. I feel bad for Zelensky because the whole world's attention's on this and not on Ukraine anymore, or not on Gaza as much as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I don't really think Iran has been set back that much. I think that it's really naive.
That's an academic discussion, so.
Yeah, and this is what this is. It's an academic podcast, is it not?
Yeah, it is.
Would you not say that we're having academic discussions?
But we've given our opinions, so
Anyway, based on all my reading, and based on, I'm sure, if all of you would go and have a look at the prominent political scientists who talk about this, regime change is a very difficult thing to enact. It's really confusing. Even if they manage to enact regime change, who would then be in charge? Would you decide to have an Iranian leader or someone like a satellite leader from another country, but then that could worsen the problem. So the whole thing is incredibly complicated.
The other challenge is their allies, Russia and China. They don't want a regime change because there's, Iran supplying them with most of their oil they need, which is why Iran probably won't close the Straits of Hormuz, because Russia and China need that oil.
And the Straits of Hormuz are, because people may not know.
Oh, Straits of Hormuz are on the Gulf, and there's a narrow part where Iran sticks out, and therefore there's this narrow straits called the Straits of Hormuz, where I think 20% of the world's oil shipments in tankers goes through that. So any stoppage or blockage of that could cause oil prices to spike globally.
Massive global recession.
Etc. So it's got major implications. And of course, the other big fear about those bunker busters was radioactive contamination of the Gulf, and the challenge of that is that most of the drinking water in the Gulf, think Dubai, etc., is from desalination plants, etc. So hopefully none of that's occurred. There's been no talk of that. We're back. We just had a little moment there. Freddie's had her wisdom teeth out this week, and I've had some sunspots removed. So we're both feeling a bit under the weather, and we're arguing too much.
Arguing a little too much. I'm sure it's interesting for you guys to listen to it, but I think it's less interesting for us. We're a bit emotionally fraught at the moment. So we've had a cup of tea, and we've come back, had some biscuits, and now we're back ready to talk again.
And we're going to talk about Congo and Rwanda. And Freddie's been looking forward to this for some time.
Looking forward to it. Yeah, I suppose, yeah. I mean, it's a great thing that there's been a ceasefire called basically between the Democratic Republic of Congo and between Rwanda. And we talked about, if you remember, a few episodes ago, we talked about Rwanda and the DRC. And, I wrote an article on some stuff that was happening in the DRC itself. And basically, for a long time, they've had conflict in this region, like a crazy long period of time, genocide, all this stuff. So in recent years, what has happened is that there are all these rebel groups that some say are funded by Rwanda that have been taking control of different regions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So one of these groups is called the M23 group, and Rwanda, claims that they have no connection to the M23 at all, but everyone else is like, dude, it seems pretty obvious that you've been funding them in some way. And there've been hints of that in media that has been put out recently. But Donald Trump has done what people have deemed impossible for a long time and has brokered a ceasefire between these two parties, which is an incredible thing because, there was many, many displaced persons, many refugees, people were heading across this whole region. So that would seemingly be a great thing. They met in the White House just
What? He
recently.
did something right.
He did something right. And look, whether that's because he's so erratic and ridiculous that everyone's scared of what he's
I
gonna do.
I've got a hypothesis on this. The one good thing they do is they combine commercial interest with these
The
political
Trump administration.
negotiations, the Trump administration, because you think about many of these rebels, etc. They're after power and financial gain, etc. And it just so happens that the Congo has some percentage of the world's rare earths. The majority China, Australia has some, but the Congo and stuff has some as well. And everyone's after these, right? So the Trump administration was smart to combine that and say, okay, we'll buy these rare earths if you have a ceasefire.
Yeah, and I think that he thinks he's being smart, but also when it comes down to it, Donald Trump just really likes his
He
rare.
likes his
He likes
deals.
his minerals, he likes his deals, and he was like, "Looky here, there's a really good deal going on here. I could potentially get access to more minerals, even more, just for brokering a
But
ceasefire, which
it
improves the lives of so many people."
it does, but in a funny way, these rebels, it's sort of they respond to such a thing. It's very interesting versus traditional political approaches. It's fascinating.
I mean, technically, the rebels haven't been responding. Technically, this is just the governments of
Okay. But the rebels have agreed to a ceasefire, have they not? Or
I don't think so. I think it was just the two countries agreeing to a
okay.
ceasefire. So the rebels, the rebels are thought to be what's it called? Auxiliary force
hmm
of um of Rwanda M23 rebels. That's what they're thought to be, but no one has really confirmed this as of yet. Yeah, and so their foreign secretaries met in the White House and agreed to this. The only problem, which is a really big problem, is that on paper this looks like a really good deal for both countries, except these minerals have been controlled by rebel forces for a long time. It's meant that all the money and economic growth that should be pouring back into the citizens of the country has actually been redirected to all the rebels and the rebel groups and redirected to international conglomerates, businesses, etc., etc. So all this wealth has been funneled out of the country, and this agreement is another example of the wealth being funneled out of the country, right? Going right into Donald Trump's hands. So, the populations aren't necessarily going to be that happy because this is the one thing that the Congo really has that could, improve their situation, improve their economic growth, and now Trump is going to be taking more of that. So,
Well,
so
the US is going to be importing, but they're going to be buying it and paying for it. So if the government gets the benefit of that in the Congo,
I'm not sure if they'll be paying for it. I think that it's potentially just a part of the agreement.
oh, for
Surely.
security.
I think so. We'll have to go into that in more detail. We can do it in the next
Yeah, we'll look
episode.
into that. This is just breaking news on Congo and Rwanda, so we'll look
It
into
is
that.
quite a big deal.
Shall we turn to the NATO summit?
Yes, we should. We've seen a lot of Trump brokering ceasefires recently, having a big impact, and then obviously he had a big impact when it came to the NATO summit that just happened. Yeah, do you want to
And
start?
Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, was sucking up to Trump and saying what a great job he'd done and how he'd got agreement, which is astounding that the Europeans have agreed to 5% of GDP to be spent on defense. It was interesting that Spain was the only one that got an exception. We still haven't got to the bottom of why Spain got the exception, but it's fascinating, and we must look into whether Portugal got an exception or
I
not.
mean, I would like to say that I know why Spain got an exemption.
Oh, yeah?
That's
Tell us.
because they simply didn't really get an exemption. They made a statement saying that they weren't going to go to 5%, and then Trump said that they will pay in tariffs later on. So I don't think that he's happy with them either. I don't think there will be a tariff exemption there. But at the moment, they have a very progressive government that has a lot of corruption issues going on at the moment. They are saying that they will increase their defense spending from what it currently is at like 1.5% to 2.1%, which is already a big change for them. And they're also saying that their tariffs and communication are all, at the power of the EU of the European Union rather than Spain itself. So they have just said to Trump, look, do what you want with the tariffs, but you're going to have to deal with the whole EU as a whole, if you feel like raising tariffs on us. So obviously they have a bit of power when it comes to that. We'll see what happens. Trump's not going to be happy, so it'll probably just mean that everyone suffers as a result. But yeah, so far they've managed to...
It's an astounding amount of money. And the question is, I was reading as well, that some of that percentage is for pensions for people in the military in these things. So don't think 5% is fully for weapons alone. There's ways of dissipating this. And so I think you were saying this, Freddie, maybe 3.5% of it is actually on weaponry and all of this, and 1.5% is on other personnel type.
That's what happened in the official Nato communique. They've said that 3.5% is for traditional military spending. So, like arms, people, gunfire, tanks, etc., etc. And then there's drones, of course, drones. Yeah, I can't forget drones. And then the other 1.5% is for the country's choosing. So they can choose what to invest in. One of those things is pensions. One of those things is just developing their defense industries more, investing more in it, like really preparing themselves to face a war, to face a full-out conflict.
So if you come back to Australia now, Australia's now under some pressure because the US would like us to increase our GDP spend to defense spending on percentage of GDP to 3.5%. We're at 2.3% at the moment. And so Albo and the government are very against that. That would blow a huge hole in the budget. But it's interesting how the Europeans are handling this. Of course, it's not until 2030 or so that they need to be doing this, but which is interesting whether they'll actually execute on it or not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess you can just claim that you would and then back out of it, like Trump has been known to do for many deals and many international agreements.
Trump won't be in power in 2030 unless he gets the third term.
So make a claim and then just don't follow through. I think I would recommend that to most people around the world right about now. But yeah, Australia's in a very different position to Spain, right? Because Spain has the entire of the European Union kind of backing them up, being one of their mates. Like it's got the European Union's economy behind them, but Australia, we're out on our own, and if we want to retain one of our strongest, most loyal allies, the US, then we need to think about increasing defense spending. Obviously, Albo has come out recently saying we won't just do what our allies tell us to do. It's not the mark of an ally to be forcing the government to raise defense.
I mean, I don't think we should do it. I mean, I think we should rip up the AUKUS agreement if need be and just stand firm on this. The fact is we need to defend Australia. The US wants us as their partner in Asia. And sure, we can do that, but not at any cost.
Yeah.
In my view.
Look, I personally think that it wouldn't be a bad thing to increase defense spending, but that's obviously at the moment the government don't want to be agreeing to anything like that. And if they do, it'll be much smaller than what Donald Trump wants them to be.
And how would you do that? You would raise taxes to do that?
I think that we're in a position where obviously the world is becoming more and more and I think that it's been on everyone's minds for the past few months. And you hear Donald Trump ranting about this on the daily. Surely it would have got into the minds of many people that maybe an increase in defense spending isn't the worst.
But I contend the US gets 60% of the benefit of any of that increased defense spend. Because they're the majority of the defensive industries in the world, right? So there's a benefit to the US of this whole thing. And I just feel like we need a porcupine strategy in Australia, which is all about defending the mainland of Australia with drones, above air, undersea drones, missiles, etc., etc. And that's what we need to do. So anyway, it'll be fascinating to see how Albo navigates this, because it won't be easy.
Definitely. I mean, fundamentally, we're just looking for a world where we used to act as a collective and defend each other. I mean, that's the core principle of NATO. Like Article 5 is that if one country is attacked, then all the countries are attacked and all will fight back. But we're moving from a world in which we worked as a collective to we working as independent countries who have to defend each border independently.
And what I found most sad about the US attack, just going back to the Iran, the irrelevance of the United Nations. Antonio Guterres says this is terrible. Nobody's listening to him. It's just shocking now. These institutions that the world has relied on
Yeah.
are sort of almost irrelevant. It's really bad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's just what we're seeing. We're seeing this very nationalist identity form. Everyone's starting to depend on themselves and no one else. And in turn, that means that these international institutions, which are the embodiment of a collective, right? They're embodiment of the world order, of working together, of joint peace and cooperation. When there's no cooperation, there's no need for these organizations anymore, and they'll just crumble. So it feels like it's the beginning of the end when it comes to the UN and other similar organizations.
Anyway, to end on a happy note, I feel like these things will improve over time. It may take some time, but hopefully things start and look a little brighter. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everyone, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
We do. Bye, guys.
Bye.